The early 20th century, a world of empires, new technologies, and simmering tensions. Few could have imagined the catastrophe that was about to unfold. A war so vast and brutal it would be called the Great War. This is the story of World War I. Our story begins not on the battlefield, but in the complex web of alliances and rivalries that defined Europe. On one side, we had the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. On the other, the Triple Alliance, later known as the Central Powers. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, though Italy would later switch sides. These weren't just friendly agreements, they were military pacts. An attack on one was an attack on all. Think of it like a continental-scale tripwire. Underneath these alliances, nationalism was boiling over. In the Balkans, a region often called the powder keg of Europe, Slavic peoples in places like Serbia dreamed of independence from the Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires. Germany, a relatively new and powerful nation, was flexing its industrial and military might, challenging Britain's long-held naval supremacy. This led to a frantic and expensive naval arms race. Everyone was building bigger, better battleships. The air was thick with suspicion and the belief that war was not only inevitable, but a necessary way to prove national strength. Then came the spark. June 28, 1914. In the city of Sarajevo, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife Sophie were on a state visit. As their car drove through the streets, a young Serbian nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped from the crowd and fired his pistol. The assassination sent shockwaves across Europe. Austria-Hungary, seeing its chance to crush Serbian nationalism, issued a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. It was a list of demands so severe they were almost impossible to accept. When Serbia couldn't meet every single one, Austria-Hungary declared war on July 28th, exactly 1 month after the assassination. The tripwire was sprung. The alliance system kicked into high gear. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic peoples, began to mobilize its massive army to support Serbia. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, demanded Russia stand down. When they refused, Germany declared war on Russia. Then, knowing France was Russia's ally, Germany declared war on France 2 days later. Germany's war plan, the Schlieffen Plan, was a high-stakes gamble. It called for a rapid, overwhelming invasion of France through neutral Belgium, hoping to knock France out of the war quickly before turning to face the slower mobilizing Russian army in the east. But invading Belgium was a critical mistake. It violated a treaty of neutrality that Great Britain had sworn to protect. On August 4th, 1914, Britain declared war on Germany. Within a few short weeks, the great powers of Europe were locked in a death grip. Everyone thought the war would be over by Christmas. They were tragically wrong. The German advance into France was halted at the First Battle of the Marne. What followed was the beginning of the war's most iconic and horrifying feature: trench warfare. From the Swiss border to the North Sea, both sides dug in, creating a vast, static network of trenches, barbed wire, and machine gun nests. Life in the trenches was a nightmare. Soldiers endured constant shelling, mud, rats, and disease. The phrase, "no man's land," perfectly captured the desolate, crater-pocked strip of earth between the opposing trenches. Generals, unfamiliar with this new type of warfare, repeatedly ordered massive frontal assaults. Millions of young men were sent over the top, charging into a hail of machine gun fire for the gain of just a few yards of shattered ground. Battles like Verdun and the Somme became synonymous with senseless slaughter, with casualties reaching into the hundreds of thousands for each side. While the Western Front was locked in stalemate, the war raged on other fronts. On the Eastern Front, the vast armies of Germany and Austria-Hungary fought against Russia. The fighting here was more mobile but no less brutal. Russia, despite its huge number of soldiers, suffered from poor leadership and inadequate supplies, leading to staggering losses. The war also went global. The Ottoman Empire joined these Central Powers, opening up fronts in the Middle East. The Gallipoli campaign, a failed Allied attempt to seize the Dardanelles Strait, was a costly disaster, particularly for Australian and New Zealand troops. In Africa and Asia, Allied forces captured German colonies, and on the high seas, British and German navies clashed, with Hermann U-boats, or submarines, waging a deadly campaign against Allied shipping. The war introduced terrifying new technologies. Poison gas, first used by the Germans, caused agonizing deaths and widespread panic. Tanks were developed by the British to break the stalemate of trench warfare, clanking across no man's land like futuristic beasts. Airplanes, initially used for reconnaissance, soon became fighters and bombers, bringing the war to the skies. For years, the United States had remained officially neutral, though it supplied the Allies with money and goods. But two key events in 1917 changed everything. First, Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking any ship heading to Britain, including American civilian vessels. The sinking of the Lusitania 2 years earlier had already angered the American public. Second, British intelligence intercepted the Zimmermann telegram, a secret message from Germany to Mexico proposing a military alliance against the United States. The public outrage was immense. On April 6, 1917, the United States declared war on Germany. The entry of the United States, with its fresh troops and immense industrial resources, tipped the balance. At the same time, Russia was collapsing from within. Years of devastating losses and internal unrest led to the Russian Revolution. The Tsar was overthrown, and the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, seized power. They quickly signed a peace treaty with Germany, pulling Russia out of the war. With Russia out, Germany launched one last, massive offensive on the Western Front in the spring of 1918. The Spring Offensive. They threw everything they had left, hoping to win the war before the American forces arrived in large numbers. The offensive made initial gains, but ultimately sputtered out. The German army was exhausted, their resources depleted. The Allies, now bolstered by hundreds of thousands of American soldiers, launched their counterattack, the 100 Days Offensive, with new tactics combining infantry, artillery, tanks, and aircraft. They began to systematically push the Germans back. The German lines broke. Faced with military defeat and revolution at home, Germany's leaders knew the war was lost. On November 11, 1918, at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, an armistice was signed. The guns finally fell silent. The aftermath was devastating. Over 16 million people, both soldiers and civilians, were dead. Another 20 million were wounded. Entire empires, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, the Russian, and the German were gone, replaced by new, often unstable, nations. The map of Europe was redrawn. The leaders of the victorious Allied powers met in Paris to forge a peace treaty. The resulting Treaty of Versailles placed the full blame for the war on Germany and imposed crippling reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions. While intended to prevent future aggression, many historians argue the harsh terms created deep resentment in Germany, sowing the seeds for another, even more destructive, conflict just 2 decades later. World War I reshaped our world in profound ways. It accelerated technological, social, and political change. It shattered the old aristocratic order of Europe and propelled the United States onto the world stage as a major power. But its greatest legacy is its tragic human cost and its stark warning about the dangers of nationalism, militarism, and failed diplomacy. The Great War was meant to be the war to end all wars. Tragically, it was not. Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history.